Okay, so after you've submitted all of your sample information and we've analyzed your sample, I'm going to go through how to access some of your sample information online, and then we'll start there, and then I'll go into actually breaking down the NUTBAL report and how to interpret it and then how to apply it. So if you wanted to check on your sample status, it's to see where it is in that process of or how far along it has gone in our lab, you can go to that samples tab and click on status. And so it'll show up here in green, and all of the fields will be filled out with their dates or their information if that sample has been completed. And if it shows up in red, it means that the sample has been created, so there's been a sample number created, but the lab hasn't received it. So that would be if you just logged it in online and then shipped it off to us, but we hadn't gotten it in the mail yet. And then if it shows up in yellow, that means that we've received it and it's being processed through the lab. And this progress field will actually have a percentage level of where it is in the lab, how far along it is in our processing. If you want to look at a report that has already been made, you can, above that status field is a report, and that samples drop-down menu. And so submitted sample reports, all of them will show here, and if it shows up in red like this top one, and it'll say sample not processed, it means that we don't have a report. Just a second, I'm going to do this so my computer does not restart in the middle of this thing. I thought I deleted it, but I guess I didn't. Okay, sorry about that. So if it shows up in red, it hasn't been processed and there's not a report for that. But if it has this rerun case option available in all of these icons, it means that there has been a report created for it. And these icons are actually clickable options, and they correspond with the key above, so that you can click. And the one that you're probably going to want to look for is this one. It looks like a stack of paper, and that number will represent the full report. Here is if you have feeds added, you'll have a sample and a mediation report. That's what the S and the M stands for. And the N is just the NRS report. So that's just the basic forage quality values. And I'll end up coming back to this page here in a little bit to talk about when you might want to use some of these and how to rerun the case. Because you can actually go back after you received your forage quality results and edit information about your sample and rerun a case with some different parameters. If you wanted to see what it might look like under a different feeding situation, or if you realize you have some information about your animals that was a little off, you can go back and rerun it. But again, I'll go through that more specifically later. If you have entered your information online, you can generate a sample sheet again later. If you go back to that sample description page where you initially entered it and you select the sample here, and then you will then click this sample form, and it'll pull up a sheet that you can print out if you lose your first one, if you just want to save one to your computer. And then now actually just getting into the actual standard report, and that's what you'll receive if you get a standard NUTBAL report from us, and that's that first option, the first basic option. And so these first two sections that we have right here on this page, they're just going to show information as a summary of what was put into NUTBAL. So it's basically just a review of the sample information. So if what this says is the current weight and VCS based on the sample information provided. So this is all information that was given to us or put in through NUTBAL online through your sample description. And so now we're kind of going to get into the actual results and projections of the report. So this model predicts things, predicts the changes and performance on a 30-day basis. So here it will be on per day, but then on the right-hand side, it'll have the 30-day weight and 30-day body condition score, assuming that this weight change occurs. And then there's going to be a performance limited by and it'll either say protein or energy. And even here, these animals are gaining weight, but they're still showing that they're limited by performance. And there's always going to be a performance limited by nutrients, even if they're gaining weight. So it's saying that if they were consuming more digestible energy, they would probably gain more weight. A lot of times if they're losing weight, it'll show that it's crude protein and that there's a protein deficiency. Below, in this lower section, it has the feeds that were applied. Let me clear all these little boxes off. So these are the feeds that you would have added a few minutes ago when we talked about adding feeds to the sample description. And when it shows up here, it means that on our report and our model is considering this as an added nutrient source. So this, the crude protein provided by this 1 pound of 20% cubes and the TDN or the energy provided, that's going to be added on to the forage quality that was predicted from the fecal sample. So it's just kind of an important reminder, if you are feeding a supplemental feed and it's hard or impossible for you to kind of either suspend feeding or kind of wean them to a lower amount, let us know, or if you plan to start feeding a feed after sampling, you can put it here and then we'll add those nutrients in, and in a second it'll show the overall diet quality calculated with the nutrients provided from these feeds. Do those. So here it's going into some of the more specifics of where your nutrients are going to be limited, what nutrients are limiting, and how much is actually being consumed by an individual animal. So if here these balances, they're all positive numbers and they're all just a normal black font, they would be red if they're showing a deficiency. So it calculates protein intake, and that will include the intake of the diet quality, the forage quality, as well as the supplemental feed, the protein provided by that. Below is the requirement, and that requirement was calculated based on the parameters provided about the animal and the information the model has on different breeds and different species, the requirements of the animal at that stage of its growth or lactation or reproduction. And so the balance is just the difference. And so again, it could be a surplus or it could be a deficiency. And the same goes with the NEM, and that stands for net energy for maintenance. So that's the base level of energy required for your animal just to function on just a standard, keeping itself alive and healthy kind of way. And keeping it at the same weight, same body condition. It's not gaining or hopefully not losing. So the net energy for maintenance is calculated in the same way where the megacals consumed reflects what was available in the forage quality diet as well as the added feeds. The requirement is again based on the animal profile and those parameters. And then there's going to be, again, another surplus or deficit. So you need to have a surplus of energy if you want to be gaining weight. And so that surplus kind of moves over into this NEG, or net energy for gain. And so here it has 8.17 as the surplus, but the model actually accounts for losses that are caused in just the conversion of these calories into muscle or gain or fat, and that can be caused due to inefficiencies in heat loss, methane production, and some other things. So basically, it's not a direct, if they have excess energy, it doesn't directly go into muscle or fat. There are going to be losses associated with producing that muscle or fat, is basically what that's saying. And so that balance is is the amount of energy that goes into the gain that we saw earlier when it said it was the animal is projected to gain 1.9 pounds per day. And so below we have the information of daily dry matter intake. So that is accounted for moisture and taken it out of what the forage would be, and the concentrates, those being the added feeds, and it calculates their intake based on just no moisture bias. So it has the concentrates, and so those are the cubes, which is 0.95, and I think we were supplementing 1, so there's a dry matter effect of 0.05 pounds. It's estimated the forage intake, and that is also a number based partly on the forage quality information from the fecal sample, and it's also from the animal parameters provided with the sample. And then if your cow has a calf on it, it estimates intake by the calf, and it produces just a total intake number represented by that cow-calf pair, that unit. Then it puts it in as a percentage of the standard reference weight for that animal, and then in terms of animal unit equivalent, and that is just based on just a generic metric for a 1,000-pound cow, and it assumes that cow, 1 animal unit equivalent assumes that cow is just a standard dry cow that's consuming 2.6% of its body weight. So this cow is consuming basically 1.6 times that standard intake of a dry cow, a dry 1,000-pound cow. Oh, sorry, I didn't keep up with these. And so here, this diet quality section, this is the forage side, is actually what the fecal sample is the quality reflected in the fecal sample. The overall information, that's the information that includes any feeds added. So that would include the cubes in addition to what they consume just from grazing. Daily milk production, that is a number generated using the model uses the animal information, the parameters, plus that the NRC, or that animal nutrition information. Those models provide equations to predict milk production based on intake levels and nutrient levels, and so this cow is meeting the potential, which is the max amount that it can likely produce, and it's meeting that, we predict that it's meeting that level of production. If you're having a protein or energy deficiency, the actual number might be lower than the potential. And then the daily fecal output, that is just a number that's predicted, and that actually will reflect intake. And you can use it. We provide fecal phosphorus and nitrogen numbers, and that is really more for it's less indicative of those nutrient levels in the diet, and it's really more indicative of what nutrients are going back into the ground, if that's something that you would like to consider, or if it's often more times used for research and in sources of environmental just nutrient cycling. So that's not a really heavily used number, but it's there if you're interested in. And then if you have entered feeds, you'll receive a nutritional mediation report. And I'm going to go into it again later with the application, and it'll make more sense with the application. But in order to generate one of these, you need to have a feed entered, a cost of the feed entered, and a minimum and maximum amount of that feed entered. And what this does is it generates basically a number to meet a deficiency, the number of this feed required to meet a deficiency if its deficiency was predicted on the previous report. But it'll make more sense again when I go through the application part with an actual sample. And then this is finally, everyone will receive this at the bottom of the report. It's the weather that was pulled. that came from your location information and the date that the sample was collected. So to apply it, we'll walk through a sample scenario. And so what you would do is, let's say for our goal is we want to maintain body condition score on a herd of reproducing cows throughout the year, most importantly to prevent them from dropping condition in the winter into late gestation and early lactation periods. So you will go through the sample submission steps previously described and use the performance predictions in NUTBAL to adjust management to meet this performance goal. So for instance, for this scenario, we're going to see how it can help us to determine what sort of the amount of supplemental feed needed, or if it's needed at all. So this is going back to the page where you can rerun cases and review previous reports. So it's important to remember let's say you already have your report made. We're going to go back into the feeds tab in a second and edit the feeds. So you'll want to do that and be able to come and rerun this case and just remember that it's here. So we'll probably pop back to this slide in a minute. So for our hypothetical sample and our herd to apply the sample quality information to, we're going to put it in Wyoming. And these are actual forage information, digestible organic matter, and crude protein information from cattle, forage quality data from Wyoming samples. And so DOM, or digestible organic matter, is on the red line, and CP, or crude protein, is on the blue line. And so you can see that forage quality in terms of digestibility and protein begin to decline at the end of the summer, and they reach their lowest concentrations in December and January. But if you're determining forage quality each month, you can start to catch this decline and hopefully prevent condition loss in your cattle. So let's say we're looking at a sample taken in November and catching forage quality in mid-decline. So at the time of sampling, the herd was at a body condition score of 5 and consuming only the pasture forage. But NUTBAL predicted that on the forage alone, the herd would drop to about a 3.8 body condition score in 30 days. So in making this prediction, NUTBAL took into account that forage quality data from the fecal sample and then the reproductive state of the herd, which in this case, they're at the tail end of lactation and they're about 100 days pregnant. So here, and this is actually a standard NUTBAL report. It's just produced, it looks a little bit differently because it's produced in kind of our bare bones version of NUTBAL that's not linked to NUTBAL Online, because NUTBAL Online is an extensive database that collects information every time we put in a sample. So we did this separately because this is not a real sample, so that's why it looks different, but it's actually the same information on a sample report you would receive. So here, this balance reflects a protein deficit of 0.534 pounds per day of crude protein. And then here it is down there again, it says that the performance is limited by crude protein. So you could go back to your sample description of the sample that, again, has already been fully processed, but you can go back and edit the sample description and add in feeds. And you can use these feeds to basically tell NUTBAL that you want to predict, or you want to use one of these feeds or a mix of these feeds to address this deficiency that it predicted. So you would return to this page and you could add different supplemental concentrates and hays that weren't fed at the time of sampling that you could feed. And if you want to determine the most cost-effective way, you would enter the cost per ton. And the most accurate way to do this would include cost to put the feed out, cost to receive the feed, as well as the cost of the feed itself. And then you would leave this amount fed field empty because you're not feeding it yet, and you want the mediation report to give you an amount to feed. You would provide it with a minimum amount fed and a maximum amount fed, and that will represent, the minimum amount represents the minimum amount realistically that you would feed for it to be worth you feeding it, worth you having the time and the effort of putting it out. And then the maximum amount that is the max amount you're willing to put out for them, whether that be just if it's a grain, you don't want to just put out a ton of whole grains, or if it's just not economical for you to put out more than like 7 pounds per head, then you can stop it there. And so again, after you fill out this information for each feed, you can hit add feed each time and it'll pop up here. One thing is that there's a couple generic feeds that you could use. If a feed that you want to feed isn't well described in the options, we have a cow cake, a generic tub, a generic TMR, and a generic textured feeds. Those are some options, and you can always edit the nutrients down here to reflect things that you have.
Pardon the interruption. Your conference contains less than 3 participants at this time.
Okay.
If you would like to continue, press *1 now.
Sorry about that interruption. But yeah, if you add feeds at the below here, it's hard to see on my screen, but there's a wasted field. And NUTBAL automatically assumes that 1% of your feed will be wasted, but if you have a better idea, if you're feeding hay and you know that a lot gets dropped on the ground, or and you know that they don't pick everything up, you can put that in for a more accurate assessment of how much that they have available to consume, or will be available for them to consume. So NUTBAL uses a least cost analysis to determine the optimal supplemental feeding strategies. So this kind of just goes over what we just did. You need to enter a list of available feeds, the cost, and the minimum and maximum. And then this is the feed mediation report. Again, it's a different text, but it's the same information that you would see if you had entered that information and gotten a feed mediation report. So what this mediation report is telling us is that distillers grains is the most efficient and cost-effective feeding option to meet the protein deficiency. So under this allocated column, it's saying that feeding 2.341 pounds per head per day of distillers grains is going to meet that protein deficiency. Under consumed, it just accounts for the waste, so it's saying they're not consuming the whole amount that you fed. And then it calculates the cost to feed that per head per day, per herd per day, and then over the 30-day period. And then it also has down here in the sensitivity analysis, it explains to you in NUTBAL's own quirky way why it picked distillers grains over the other 3 feeds that you asked for it to consider. So basically it's saying for you to want to feed any of these other feeds, these are the costs that it would be required for it to be a competitive option against the distillers grains. And these negative numbers actually means for the beans cubes and the alfalfa at these costs. Basically, someone would have to pay you to have to feed those for that to be as economical as feeding distillers grains to meet that protein deficiency. So we've gone back and added that distillers grains at that amount that was recommended by NUTBAL to the animal sample description in the feeds added section. And then you go back to that page where you can rerun the sample case, and you click rerun, and this is a new report that would be generated from adding a feed. And so what you can see here is that it's actually their gaining condition over the next 30 days, or they're maintaining their condition, actually. This is their current, and here is what they project it will be in the next 30 days. And this is after now here in the feeds added section, it has a spot showing that there is a concentrate it's consuming. So this is showing that this is what the diet and performance is reflecting when they're consuming the distiller's grains along with the forage. And so this, let's say we go and we apply that strategy to determine how much supplementation is needed each time we take a sample. And so the red dashed line represents what it would look like if we didn't add distiller's grain supplements in, but the blue line represents what it looks like if we did. We followed the nutritional mediation report's recommendation to maintain animal requirements. And then finally, we'll take a closer look at the condition of the supplemented cows. So this blue line is assuming that we started supplementing them. And then these darker blue bars represent the amount of DDGs that were supplemented to maintain the body condition as recommended by NUTBAL. So in order to keep this animal's body condition about a 5 or between 5 and 6, we started supplementing in November, and it continues throughout the winter. So that wraps up our webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to call or email us, or right now you can use the question Q&A section and we'll answer here in a second. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us and for your attention. And we'll take a few minutes to look at the questions now. Also, I'll put this up. This is our contact information. And also we do, if you can search for us on Facebook and YouTube. We have the YouTube channel and a Facebook page as well.